We're here today at Hermes Gallery in Halifax, Nova Scotia with Mathew Reichertz. This is his exhibition Dog Park, an installation of image-based and abstract painting inspired by a walk in the park from the perspective of a dog's nose. Mathew is a contemporary artist and professor at the Nova Scotia College of Art and Design. He's agreed to talk to us today and answer a few questions about the work and his practice.
I've always been considered myself a painter, but really a painter in the context of what I sort of thought of as contemporary art, and so the move from a kind of rectangle stretched canvas to other kinds of materials and possibilities came fairly naturally to me. Some of the previous work that I did had a very direct relationship to comic books, and that work happened on different materials. Different materials are really important in an art making context, where the materials play a significant role. So in the work that I'm referring to, I was painting on polystyrene, which is a kind of sheet plastic that you can that comes in squares or rectangles, but you can cut it. And I started eventually cutting out some of the panels of the comic book that I was making, and that's what kind of led to the possibilities that exist in this exhibition. And so what we're looking at the moment is work which is still in progress, and it's meant to be like a walk in the park from the perspective of a dog's nose. There's a move in the exhibition from representation, and when it is representation, we're dealing mainly with foliage, the kind of things that would be close to a dog's head as they were moving through a park, and then there is a move into I guess what you might describe as abstraction, and that abstraction in this case has a representational purpose, and the purpose is to delve into what smell could actually look like. Mm-hmm. And again, the important part here is from the perspective of a canine, because the nose of a dog is and the olfactory system of a dog is very different from ours. Different dogs have different abilities to smell, but even the dogs that have the sort of least powerful olfactory system can smell things hundreds of times better than human beings. So the more that I thought about how to represent smell, the more I realized that it needed the parts that are the smell needed to be as intricate and complex as the stuff that represents foliage.
And it seems that there's a sort of spatial dimension to how you're representing smell. So is it sort of the way that it would be spread out through a landscape, or how it moves through, how odors, I guess, move through a landscape, and that the dog would kind of be following that, or how, there's a very spatial quality. I wonder if you could talk a bit about that.
So I did a lot of research, or, I have a layman's understanding of how the smell works for dogs. And there's been a lot of, or some scientific research about, for instance, how dogs trace smell through a terrain. And so scientists have studied how dogs try to track smell, and then they'll lose smell and the kind of movement they make to find the smell again. And that's given, and of course they also have done things to illustrate for them the way that at least air currents move over a terrain. And so there are, so some of that are references here. Like some of the shapes of the abstraction are references to that kind of research, or at least my understanding of that kind of research. But I think more importantly, like the more I thought about it and spoke to people about it, the more I came to realize that a dog's sense, olfactory sense, it was really so amazingly powerful that it creates a kind of architecture, a spatial architecture that the dog exists in. And so some of the scale, some of the way that there is a move from abstraction into representation into complete abstraction is an effort to sort of engage that idea that this is actually quite alien to us. And of course, it may have nothing to do with the dog's actual experience of smell, but to get to that place where at least I'm pointing at the possibility.
An attempt to kind of visualize it and to imagine what it might look like or feel like as an experience.
It's in one sense a kind of effort at engaging with ideas about synaesthesia, but really, it's sort of cross-species synaesthesia.
In terms of your representation of odor and kind of smell, there seems to be several different ways that you're representing it throughout the room and the space. I'm wondering if that's an evolution in time and how you're thinking about it, or if it's just the idea that there is such diversity and kind of multiplicity in different kinds of odors that you wanted to, some being more pungent, some being kind of softer. Did you want to kind of capture that? Like some of them seem to be really dynamic in terms of their movement and energy and almost aggressive, whereas others are a bit more intricate.
They've got this wonderful sense of smell. They can smell like 1,000 times better than we do. And it's very interesting. There are all kinds of other ways. When a dog goes like they make that kind of, what they're doing is they're actually, they're taking more odor in, but part of that is also clearing their nose of other smells so that they can be more precise about the smells that they're actually analyzing. But the other thing about dogs is that their eyesight is actually not very good. They see about 75% as well as we see in terms of clarity. And they also don't see reds and oranges very well. They do see yellows, so I took some liberty, but when I thought about how these smells would look, I decided to portray them in colors that a dog would not actually see. And then, I thought a lot about formal aspects of painting. And so I'm talking about the quality of a shape, meaning is it jagged, is it rounded? If it's jagged, what character does that jaggedness have? Is there a sense of symmetry to a shape or not? I could go on, the quality of the color itself. All of these things are formal qualities. That's what I'm talking about when I use the word form. And they all, for me, make me feel a particular way. I don't claim to be synesthetic at all, but I have a sensitivity to how form works because I'm a visual artist. And so I'm quite interested in trying to figure out how the complexity that exists out in the world as smell, there's thousands of smells that we can experience. Some are kind of crinkly, some are rounded, some are full, some are kind of high-pitched. The question became for me, what kind of formal aspects of abstraction could I manipulate to give a real sense of the diversity of smell that we might encounter? In some cases, I did have a particular kind of representation in mind. So the poop behind you, there's a kind of a real representation of poop there, and then the kind of red smell that comes up is the smell of poop in the park. And I was trying to think of a strong shape, and the relationship of the shapes has a kind of overwhelming quality to it, because, you know, and also there's an aspect to it that sort of travels like along the wall and to it through another space, which relates sort of to that, I hope, to the way that we might experience like a poopy smell in the park. But some of the other smells, I decided I didn't want to be representing, like, you know, oh, this is the smell of a rose, and this is the smell of some other kind of plant, or this is the smell of rotting leaves, or something like that. So what I really just tried to do was give, so far, as much variety to the abstraction as I can.
So narrative seems to be an important part of this work and of your previous work. Could you talk a bit about that and how it informs this piece?
Mm-hmm. I've been drawn to using like stories in my work since the very beginning of like thinking about art, and so, you know, in that sense, it's kind of a cross that I have to bear. Like well, because the thing is, when I say that, I mean that it's not just something that I'm intellectually interested in. It's the way that all of the sort of processes that go into me thinking about making work function, and whether I like it or not, it sort of comes into it. This exhibition is probably one of the least narrative works that I've made, but even it really does have this idea of passage through time. And, you know, if we're talking about a dog moving through foliage and going from smell to eyesight and back to smell again, it doesn't have a normal narrative progression, but it still is a movement through time. And so, but you know, the thing is, if you look around in contemporary art, people use the word narrative a lot. Mm-hmm. But I actually feel like if we're going to be, you know, clear about what narrative is, that there isn't much of it in contemporary art. Okay. There's a lot of, you know, what you might call fractured narrative. There's a lot of like incomplete narrative or ambiguous narrative. That's not generally what we think of when we think about storytelling. You know, I mean, it's not like when if you're watching a independent movie and the ending is a little bit ambiguous. Mm-hmm. You know, a lot of people hate that. They hate the ambiguity. So
French film.
Yeah. So you know, so when you're talking about narrative in contemporary art, often it's so ambiguous or fractured that it really actually is not the first or even the second thing that a viewer might think about when they're looking at the work. So in that sense, I would say, but there are reasons why. You know, like when, you know, modernism was a rejection of the past, and art of the past had much to do with storytelling, and so at one point in history, do we reclaim what was rejected? And I think that it's not that there aren't people making stories in contemporary art, or that people don't want to do that kind of thing, but it's not that prevalent yet. And the other reason it's not that prevalent is because there's all kinds of other venues for it. You know, there's writing, there's movie making, there's, you know, podcasts. I mean, there's all kinds of ways to tell stories that are arguably better suited than painting. So, but having said all that, I'm wedded to storytelling in my work.
So thinking about how to tell a story or how to bring narrative to your work isn't something that, I guess, is kind of easy or follows a specific formula. It's something that you have to kind of invent for yourself, I guess, and discover like what's the best way to bring narrative to painting, or do you feel like you're drawing on other traditions, other, I don't know, painters or artists that have come before you, or even other disciplines? Like how do you...
Certainly do make reference to all kinds of other things. And I think really, though it's not that evident in this work, that there's the reference to comics is really the strongest reference in my work. Though I make it with a kind of a wholehearted sort of feeling of being embedded in contemporary art and contemporary painting practices. So I don't consider myself a comic book artist, but I'm certainly engaging with aspects of comics that are more than the way that Lichtenstein would have sort of portrayed one in the frame of a comic book. So here, the sort of the cutouts, the graphic quality, even though there isn't a narrative with thought bubbles and speech bubbles and things like that, I think still has a fairly clear relationship to comics.
Yeah. So in this sense, do you think that sort of escaping the rectangle and leaving kind of traditional painting, as painting on a canvas aside, is in some sense what enables you to use narrative more? I think being able to sort of spatialize the work and create an immersive experience for the viewer who kind of follows the trail, the scent trail, is that kind of something that you think is fundamental, I guess, to this story here?
That's a great question. And again, I think I would have to say yes. You keep on asking me you have these good thoughts about the work. It's not that there's a beginning or an end in this particular space. I mean, you walk in and probably, you'd walk like right over to this wall or something like that. But the fact that there's a kind of feeling of a continuous connection between all these pieces is still going to arguably make you feel like you're walking through following in the end, like the smell of the dog in some way or another, or the dog's location in some way or another. And when I think about the other work that I've done, I'm always thinking about the kind of architectural aspect of the work, meaning that you're a body in space and you have to move to apprehend the work, as opposed to just like a painting where the implication is that generally speaking you can stand in one spot and get the whole picture from it. There's a movement through time in the story, and there's also a movement through time and space in the gallery with your body.
In terms of storytelling as well, it seems like there is a connection to place as well. You mentioned that a lot of the images that are more representational come from Point Pleasant Park, and from your own experiences as well with your dog and spending time in the park.
There are authors who write about things that have nothing to do with their own experience, but I don't know how they do that. I guess maybe they do that with a lot of research, I guess. And so most of the work that I do, although it really isn't important that it's me. It's not. I don't consider my work autobiographical, but I do need to be able to use my experiences and the kind of richnesses of our own personal experiences to make the work, or to draw on to make the work. So in this particular case, I did have a dog, and I walked her twice a day for a decade, often in Point Pleasant Park, where a lot of this comes from. And especially as she got older, I would sit there, and she sniffed a rock for 5 minutes and get aggravated, thinking, why are we still here? So some of that often for me, I find that things that annoy me are things that I end up making work about because I think about them right, more. But I spent so much time in the park with my dog that at one point I was coming back from a trip and I was I returned and I got off the plane. I was in the airport at the Halifax Stanford International Airport, and they had a kind of kiosk that had a bunch of brochures for various tourist attractions around the area. And I saw one that said Point Pleasant Park, and I was waiting for a ride, so I picked it up, and it was a picture of me running in the park with my dog. Except they had a photographer that just clicked. So that I did feel a particular connection to the park, and I know the park like the back of my hand. You know, I would trailblaze through the woods with my dog and that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned that part of this project was the idea of getting out of the studio as well, and engaging more with, I guess, the world.
Well, you know, so this project started as a residency in Point Pleasant Park, where I proposed that I would be doing paintings on plein air, and people would be able to watch me paint or ask me what I was doing, and I would talk about this project that I was working on. And so I had a lot of tools that I made, so I had a wagon that I would pull through the park so that I could make the paintings, and I would make them from sort of the level at which my dog's nose would have been, which meant just basically sitting as I was painting, like kind of a little bit lower. And but at the time, you know, this painting behind me, the stump that you're looking at, that's from a 4x4 sheet of material. The material is called Lexan film. And so I had a 4x4 foot surface that I was painting on. And often when people go out into nature to paint, they're painting on relatively small surfaces. But when you're painting on larger surfaces, it's complicated. Like it was heavy to bring the materials. It was often really hot. You know, I'd be outside, and 3 hours outside in the heat would be quite difficult. Or it would be, as often the case in Halifax, misting or raining, and would get incredibly cold. And so just getting the kind of representational painting done was really difficult. It was, and so all of the ideas about the smell, or much of them, came after the residency was finished.
Okay. And what started you thinking about that idea?
Well, it was always part of the plan.
Yeah. Okay.
It's just that I couldn't do it all.
Yeah.
I couldn't manage to do all of the things I needed to do to make the representational painting, and then devote myself in a meaningful way to how the smell might look.
Okay.
And yeah, so it just took longer than everything takes longer than you think it's going to take, really.
You situate your work within kind of contemporary practice. You think of yourself as a contemporary painter. Can you talk a bit about what that means to you and how that notion has kind of informed your practice and what it means to be a painter today?
You know, one of the things about making a painting is that, and this goes for drawing too, but there's a very basic aspect to it, which is that it's made through a lot of different marks over time, and there you could make a sculpture that way, and you could make almost anything that way, but it's the nature of making a painting. You have to work really hard to make a painting that wasn't a kind of build-up of marks over time.
So it's quite an intricate and complex piece, and as you say, you painted on and then cut out the shapes on Lexan film, is that work?
Which is a kind of thin acrylic. And so that I think is an aspect, the kind of mark making, the build-up of marks is an aspect of making paintings that still is very much present in this work. Even though I'm not using a traditional surface at all, and I've got rid of the kind of rectangle of the painting, and And I think that those things like the traditional surface, the traditional materials, the rectangle, those are all, I think there's still a lot of possibilities that, within that realm, but it's also a very problematic place because it's where painting exists really strongly as an object to be purchased, you know, and within the art market, everything is can be sold as art, but painting is really the sort of the most understandable and the best idea about what art is in terms of like something that could be sold. And so it's so easy for that meaning of the tradition of painting to be imposed on what you try to do, even if you're not actually that interested in working within a market.
Yeah.
So that's not the reason that I've got rid of the rectangle, but it's an important aspect of not having the rectangle and the traditional canvas and gessoed surface and that sort of thing.
And so, in terms of the actual setup and kind of where the parts of the painting, I guess, are placed, is that something that is, I guess, site-specific and flexible? Is it something that you, that changes in a way, like different pieces that can take different forms, or do you have a kind of fixed idea of where?
This is not site-specific, this
Okay.
work. I mean, it is, what my understanding of site specificity is, involves when work is really mostly informed by the site and really could not exist in any meaningful way outside of that site. And I think just like I was talking about how maybe we sometimes misuse the word narrative in contemporary art, we also misuse the word site-specific in contemporary art. It's very hard to make site-specific work. And if you do make it, chances are people won't recognize that it's your work because it should be so influenced by the site that it won't look like anything that you've done before. So this I would call site-dependent work. This is work that I can take from one place to another, and with some careful planning, I can activate that space with the work. And sometimes it'll work better, and sometimes it won't work as well, and I won't know what works better or not until I actually do it. But so in this case, what I've done is I've documented every single piece that I have available to me in this work, and I've made it so that I know exactly what size it is digitally, for instance in Photoshop, and then I can take every single wall that I'm going to work on and I can scale things properly so that I can make designs for how the work might be in the space before I actually get in there to install.
So in this piece there are bits of more representational painting, like the log and the foliage and the dog poop. And I'm just wondering if having that aspect of the work is important to you. Does it feel like that anchors it in some way, or can you see this work moving more just in the direction of kind of abstraction? Right now it's sort of, there's a tension between the two. Is that tension important, or could it potentially lose representation in that more realistic sense entirely?
It's a good question. At this point, I was very happy that the idea that I had about this being from the dog's perspective brought up this idea of the relationship between representation and abstraction. Because really, for someone dealing with mainly with narrative, abstraction is fairly alien to me. And I don't know why I would make an abstract painting unless it has some reason which this project has given me. Yeah. But the way I'm still envisioning this is that as a dog is walking, they may get caught up in a smell, but they move back and forth between their eyes and their nose. And so in this particular project, I think that there's going to remain a kind of mix where there's a kind of, she might be looking at something, then get caught up in a smell, and then notice something else visually, and then get back into a smell, that sort of thing.
So I'm just wondering about how you're thinking of scale in this work. Some bits seem to be almost life-size, whereas others are a bit smaller, or maybe kind of seen from a distance. I'm wondering, if that was something really conscious and what effect you wanted to have with scale.
When you think about, when you ask a question about scale, I think there's this idea of a window, like the painting as a window. And so how close to the window pane is something. And if it's actually life-size, then it's right up against the window pane. And if it's smaller, then it's kind of moving back into space. And saying that is much easier than actually doing it in a way which it has tremendous consistency. And so the idea is to portray foliage as if it's up close and personal for the dog, but sometimes the dog looks up and looks far. So in that case, this is that's an indication of place. Anyone who's been to Point Pleasant Park will recognize the crane and know where they are. But also even though the dog is mainly concerned when in a kind of sniffing situation with what's kind of right around their head, they will look up every once in a while, and then there'll be the kind of pushback in space. When I make work, it takes a few years to make the body of work, and that's just kind of that's my process. And so it does look, when I put work up, like, oh wow, there's a lot of work here, and it is, but that's because I take several years to make it.
And you said that this work is still in progress?
Yeah, the whole question about what a walk is, like if I went to walk my dog, I might walk her for 1 kilometer or more. So I can't make a piece which is 1 kilometer long. I could, but it would be unrealistic. So somehow in my mind, 150 linear feet has come up. And I'm more than halfway there at this point with the work, but it needs to be longer so that it really feels like it's a walk, and gives a kind of lifelike sense of complexity. Meaning there's too much to take in. Like that's what I want it to feel like, is that there's too much to actually look at. But still, it's a representation. It's not a real walk.
Well, thank you, Matthew.
Well, thank you very much, Christine. Pleasure talking to you.
You too. Thank you.